All right, men, welcome to today's episode of Strong Men, Strong Marriages, the science of life after death. So, a little bit different. We're usually talking about marriage, but um, to me, this relates, right? Because if we, you'll see why as we go through. But I think the more we understand about the nature of God and the nature of us as human beings, the better we are as husbands, as fathers, as people in general. So I've read some books these past couple weeks that have been really impactful and just want to kind of share some things I've learned from there with you guys. So my name is Mike Frazier, MD. I'm a psychiatrist and marriage coach. And I help high-achieving Christian men have more intimate marriages. So some wins from guys in my Strong Men, Strong Marriages program this week. Guys are having talks about intimacy where maybe that was kind of scary to do before, but they're doing it and having great conversations and coming to win-wins and enjoying sex more. Super fun to see. One gentleman in particular, he had a babysitter who wasn't really doing a particularly good job, and this was a guy who maybe had a little bit of struggles with confrontation before, but he's able to come up and just speak his mind and be clear and direct and super cool. Guys are having increased connection with their children, just building those relationships, feeling stronger with them. Guys are having more connection with God, which the more you connect with God, the more you're able to be a better husband, a better father, a better whatever you do for work, right? All of that. Guys have an increased confidence. When you connect more with God, you have more confidence. When you're building your skills, you have more confidence, all of that, right? For me, this past couple weeks, past week has been about, reading these books about near-death experiences, and it's really helped shift my mindset and I think be a better man overall. So there's lots of beliefs out there about what happens after death. So if you ask most Christians, they probably say, okay, well, you die, then you're judged, you're going to go to heaven or hell, some variation of that, and that there's a resurrection, right? Because we believe that Jesus resurrected, so we believe we're going to be resurrected. What that exactly looks like, kind of probably depends a little bit who you ask. But Islam, pretty similar. There's a heaven and a hell, there's a resurrection, there's a judgment. Hinduism, Eastern-based reincarnation based on karma from past lives. So if you did like a better job in a past life, maybe your reincarnation's a little bit better. If it was, if you kind of did a bad job in that life, then your reincarnation's a little bit worse. Eventually get to moksha. Not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly, but you kind of break out of that cycle and then you unite your soul with the divine, and now you're kind of out. That's what you're going for at the end of it. Buddhism, continual rebirth into nirvana, which is the liberation from suffering and the cycle of rebirth. The book I read, Proof of Heaven, talks about how like nirvana actually means like extinguish, like you're just kind of like done, you like don't exist. It's kind of depressing in a way. Judaism, kind of a range, like maybe there's bodily resurrection, maybe there's a spiritual afterlife, maybe there's nothing after this. Atheism, right? Atheism will say, hey, we're just physical beings here. It's just our brain operating. Once you die, that's it, right? That's the end of everything. That's the end of consciousness. Agnostic would say more, well, like we don't really know, and we won't really know for sure. And so, lots of thoughts, right? Lots of beliefs about what happens after death. So what's the science, right? What's the evidence? So as Christians, right, we kind of go off the Bible and we say, okay, we got Jesus, we've got the resurrection. Okay, there's lots of witnesses that saw it, that saw him as a resurrected being. Okay, in the book Proof of Heaven, he talks about how people didn't necessarily recognize Jesus right when he was resurrected, and his interpretation of that, the author of that book said, well, it was maybe just because he showed up in a form that was hard for us to understand or comprehend. So when we get into these near-death experiences, what a lot of people say that went through them is like the words we have just can't really explain what heaven or what life after this is like. We're kind of stuck in 3 dimensions here. There's more dimensions after that, more colors, more experiences. The way you feel love is deeper. So, yeah. Jesus. So, what does Jesus teach about life after this? Jesus himself doesn't teach a ton about it, right? He says, okay, what is eternal life? Okay, to know God and Jesus, to have a great relationship with God and Jesus, right? That's what heaven's about, to come in there, to be connected. And these near-death experiences really describe this, of like coming to feel that love and be part of that and connect in that way. So that's what Jesus says. The other thing he says is, in my Father's house, there are many rooms or mansions or dwelling places or homes, depending on what translation you look at. So, and he goes to prepare a place for you. So, not a lot of info. He also says, like, after this life, people aren't married or given in marriage. That's kind of a here thing. And after this life, it's going to be kind of different in some way. We don't exactly understand how. So, yeah, I mean, Jesus doesn't teach a ton about what happens after, besides, kind of those things himself, Jesus himself, right? So, what does the science say? So, a lot of people will say, oh, those religious beliefs, you can't prove any of that stuff. That's, just people making things up. That's more like the academic viewpoint, a lot of academic viewpoints. And then religious people will be like, well, you just have to have faith, you just have to believe. But these couple books were really cool because they took it from a very scientific approach, a data-based approach. There's limitations. Excuse me. Of course, there's limitations to this, right? Like, you can't go around like stopping people's hearts and then bringing them back and being like, oh, like, did you have a near-death experience? Tell me about it. You can't like do a randomized controlled trial where you're basically killing people hoping they have a near-death experience, then trying to bring them back to life. So you have to kind of do this observationally, right? And kind of see, like, basically invite people to share those stories. And then clinically, you can verify, if these people were dead based on medical records, did their heart stop, for how long, that kind of thing. So 2 books that I read, one was Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. Both these guys are MDs. This guy was a neurosurgeon, actually, and so he got bacterial meningitis that basically ate the cortex of his brain. So any experience he would have had during this time, like, could not have been generated by his cerebral cortex, which was unique, right? Because this is why he calls it proof of heaven. Because whatever he experienced during this time, it wasn't just generated by some thing going on in his brain, because his brain could not have generated the experiences he was going through. So essentially, he goes to this beautiful place. He feels loved. He gets this message that you are loved. You can do nothing wrong. Everybody's connected. He ends up, he has sort of a guide there with him, and he doesn't recognize that guide at first. He kind of goes back and forth to this, orb of light that he, gets information from. And, people aren't communicating with words, but they're just communicating, and he's learning these truths. And so all this amazing stuff's happening while his body is dead, basically. He's on the ventilator, he's brain dead. But then eventually comes back, and makes an amazing recovery, like a miraculous recovery. And then he goes out, and now he's sharing his story with people, and how, this is evidence, and how it kind of goes against the evidence of, well, these near-death experiences are just your brain generating, like, it's a DMT dump in your brain. So in his case, that couldn't have happened because his brain wasn't operating to where that even could have happened. So just very kind of methodically shoots down any of these things that are like, oh, these near-death experiences, just trying to say, like, oh, that's nothing, right? That's just your brain generating something. He's like, no, this is proof. Like, it's not that. It's something else, something beyond that. And really his takeaway was that there is life after this, that our consciousness does continue to exist, that there's this love and interconnectedness between all people. And really quantum theory, quantum mechanics, all of that also kind of goes with this idea that we've got energy that's all connected, and we're all connected to each other, and that we're connected through this life force, right? And that love really is the greatest thing. So that's kind of a summary, but I would definitely recommend reading the book. That's my quick summary. The other book there is After. It's called After by Bruce Grayson, also a doctor, MD. So he didn't have a near-death experience, but he kind of goes through and has collected a bunch of stories from people that have had it, and kind of breaks it down into these different categories, and basically just tries to figure out, okay, like, what can we actually conclude on a scientific basis from this? And his conclusion is that, yeah, like, consciousness does exist beyond. Also, that it's our brains actually acts more as a filter of consciousness than like helps generate it. So, in other words, like if these near-death experiences were generated by increased activity in the brain, certain drugs would show that on MRIs, or in some of the studies that were done, there would have been increased brain activity, but actually there was decreased brain activity when people were having these amazing near-death experiences. So, our brain's more filtering it than it is generating it. So that was one of his big conclusions. But yeah, just really cool books. So yeah, these, again, like the near-death experience, these are folks who were pronounced clinically dead. Their hearts had stopped. They were not breathing, right? So yeah, their conclusions, again, consciousness is separate from just the brain. The brain's not generating consciousness, but more of a filter of consciousness. And again, like the main things that these people came away with were, hey, we're all connected. Like there's a loving presence after this. People did not fear death after these near-death experiences. Also, one of the Eben Alexander, he's a psychiatrist. Also, or sorry, Bruce Grayson's a psychiatrist, and he interviewed people who were suicidal, who even tried to kill themselves and then had these near-death experiences. And he said, his expectation was maybe these people would want to commit suicide more after, because they had seen that, life after this was great and amazing, and they weren't afraid of death anymore. But what he found with everybody was that these experiences actually made them want to live life more and enjoy life more, and not fear death, but also not fear life either, and enjoy it more. So really, I think, to me, these were just, gifts from God to say, like, hey, there is life after this, and it's amazing, and live your life now, live without fear and with love, right? Perfect love cast out all fear. The other conclusion, right? There's a creator who loves us, who cares about us. That was a little bit more in the Eben Alexander one. He kind of drew those conclusions. But, and that we'll also see loved ones after this life. Most people who went through these near-death experiences did meet loved ones who had passed away. So really cool information. So how does this help me? So it's given me a better sense of connectedness to other people. It's helped me see, okay, yeah, like we are all one, like whether we're Christian, whether we're Buddhist, whether we're whatever, right? Whether we're whatever our race is, however old we are, like we're all connected in this way. Really, it's helped me have more love for my wife and kids. It's been cool in that way, to respect their beliefs, to understand that, hey, maybe they don't believe exactly the same as me, and that's okay, right? To have more love for the people all around me, my patients, my clients, my family, friends, people I see on the street. After reading this book, I went to CVS. I was picking up a prescription, just felt a lot of love for the guy giving me the prescription. A continued desire to be that secure attachment figure, right? Like that's who I want to be. I feel like that's who God's inviting me to be right now. So yeah, even more confidence in my own beliefs, right? About our eternal nature, that something is happening after this life, that we can connect with God now, right? That's a real thing. It's just kind of tuning into that force. That's what Proof of Heaven, Eben Alexander is all about. That like God is in us all the time. We just have to kind of tune into it. And yeah, my desire to live more in tune with God. Something about like in tune, like harmony, right? Like vibrations, being able to be in that spot. So listen, like if you want to grow in God with us, if you want to increase that connection with God, if you want to live this life now with love and without fear, come join us in Strong Men, Strong Marriages. This is the kind of work we're doing. We're growing as men. We can come closer to God. We can be great husbands. We can be great fathers, great at whatever job we happen to do for work. So if that is interesting to you and you want to join a group of men that are wanting to do it, come join us. Strong Men, Strong Marriages. Visit strongmen.io or click the link in the show notes. There's a group program that opens once a month. It's open right now, actually. You need to be on the email list to get that invitation. So if you haven't joined yet, strongmen.io, join the email list. And all right, men, we will see you there. Strongmen.io. Stay strong in God, men. We'll see you next episode.